Hello, everybody. We will talk about the microfrontends and microservices and how you can actually use microfrontends with Kubernetes. I'm Milan Unger. I work in Siemens Healthineers as senior key expert.
Hi, I'm Michal. I'm also working in Siemens Healthineers, and I'm a test architect currently.
So let's start with the definition. So if you hear about the microservices and microfrontends, they are now quite common buzzwords. And if you look at the definitions, you will find it sounds very similar. So they are encapsulated, they are small, focused, and you can use them to decompose your solution, and you can use them as loosely coupled components to build a bigger architecture. But when you look how you use it, there is quite a difference. Yeah? The microservices, you will use Kubernetes, you will use Docker, you will use GitOps and DevOps. That's something which we all know, at least if we are moving in the cloud-native world. If you look at the microfrontends, then you have a lot of the possible ways how to deploy it. You can integrate it in the compile time, you can integrate it in the runtime, you can deploy it through the CDN, you can build it in using the NPM, or you can use the backend Docker container for your microfrontend. So if you really want to build a system which is built from the microfeatures, what you actually want is to have the vertical microfeatures. So you don't want to have one monolithic front end, which then communicates with a lot of small micro backends, because that will lead to the situations where each microservice is already ready, but the monolithic microfrontend is lagging behind the schedule. So we would like to have really the vertical microfeatures, you would like to have independent release cycles, and you would like to have independent teams, and both on the front end and the back end. So the question is actually how you can bring the functionality of the back end in using the Kubernetes and using the GitOps also to the microfrontends world. So really have the similar approach for the front end and for the back end. So that was basically the problem we were facing a few years ago. Our company has collaboration with the Slovak Technical University, and here we are having the lectures where we try to teach students how to build modern cloud-native full-stack solutions based on the microservices and 12-factor applications. Part of the goal of the students is to deliver semestral project. You have now around 50 students which needs to deploy their microfeatures to common solutions. So for the backend, it was quite clear. They will just deploy to the GitOps some microservice, some Docker and Kubernetes manifest for the backend. But for the front end, it was quite challenging how you will actually integrate 50 different features into common solutions to really keep the main idea of the microservices on the backend, also on the front end, and at the same time keep every student or every project of the student independent, so they are not depending on each other and you cannot then evaluate the work. So our solution was Kubernetes controller, which we use to orchestrate the microfrontends, and we name it Polyphia, and I would like to ask Michal to continue.
Yes, so the Polyphia is not just a controller. As you know, if you want some UI, you also have to have some libraries in the front end. So we see the link is there for our GitHub. We have multiple repositories there. One of them is also a shell that can display this UI, and also a JavaScript library that actually communicates with the controller to display all the web components. So what is the controller actually? How does it look? So it's implemented using Operator SDK for its simplicity, and it's written in Go. The reason why I'm mentioning it here, because the first version of this that was created 3 years ago or so was written in Prolog. I'm not sure how many of you speak Prolog, but I didn't. So it was hard for me to describe anything to the students or help them with any bugs. But thankfully, the GitHub Copilot speaks Prolog. So I just asked him, please explain this code, and I started rewriting it in Go. But the problem with that is that it ended up being some sort of combination of Prolog and Go. It was just Prolog rewritten in Go. So we decided with Milan to create the new version and also refactor the custom resources a little bit. So we have 3 different custom resources. One is Microfrontend class, one is Microfrontend, and one is web component. So let's look a little bit more into details. So here it is. I hope it's visible. This picture depicts how the different custom resources are actually mapping to the UI, right? So we have the Microfrontend class, which is basically the entry point to your single-page application. And our controller can handle multiple Microfrontend classes, so you can have multiple applications basically under it. Then we have something that we call Microfrontend that is basically, you could summarize it as a reference to some service that is then serving your web components, right? Or the bundle that is having these web components. So it's not really like visible anywhere, but it's required for us to know where to load the web components from. Then we have the web component itself. That is again visible in the UI. You can see those arrows. There are 2 arrows right now because you can see in this shell that we have. This is a material design shell. Currently, we have some context there, and we can put the web components into different contexts. One of them could be this application with this nice icon and everything, and one can be in this railer. Let's go a little bit more into details. I'm not sure how much the code is visible, but you can find this presentation also on the GitHub if you want to have a detailed look. So the Microfrontend class is actually, as I said, the entry point. What you can specify there is the base URL for that application and some other metadata for it. Like, for example, CSP header for security, and also things like some additional headers, if you want progressive application enabled and things like this. So it's all handled then on our side. Yeah. Then we have the Microfrontend. Here you basically just reference the backend that will serve the individual bundles and the web components in them. So if you have a look at the example, we have some reference for Microfrontend called Polyphia MD shell, which stands for Material Design Shell. You can see that for this Microfrontend, we want it to belong to this FEA frontend class. So there is sort of grouping, right? So if you request the base URL of FEA, then it will only load the Microfrontend of that class. Then you have some service reference. This can either be internal service inside of Kubernetes or and some external side also. Then there is a different option that you will have to disable where it's not proxying through our server. Then you have the module path that you want to load, and you can load multiple modules from the same service, but you would need to use different microfrontends. You can also specify some dependencies. So for example, our material design shell is dependent on material design web components, right? So we have an additional microfrontend there defined, and that's the material design. In this case, it's still served from the same service, but it's a different bundle. And one specialty here is also that you can specify some static files that needs to be loaded before the module. So, for example, some fonts or some style sheets and things like this. There are a lot more options, but this is like a simple example. Then we have the web component itself, as I was also pointing with the arrows at the same web components. So this Saturn is one web component. It is using, again, this Polyphia MD shell microfrontend, and it is looking in this bundle for a web component named Polyphia MD app. It has some attributes. It's just regular HTML element attributes. Like if you were putting it into base HTML, you can define any attributes you need for your implementation. Implicitly, it also receives the context. And then you can specify where it should display. So we have some sort of display rules designed. We have 3 options. It can be either any of that you specify there, all of, or none of. So this way you can combine it really and put it into different contexts. So in this case, for example, the middle one is the application context, and the left one, the Railer, is the Railer context. So that's why you can see the 2 instances of on that web component. And because of it receives this implicit context information, you can also then change how the web component is displayed when you're displaying it. Yeah, and again, maybe one slide back, there is this href that says what should happen when I click on this tile or on this icon on the left. And it will redirect you to a different URL, basically. And here is another example of web component where you specify the display rules that the path need to match the Saturn path, and then it will load an image. So this is, again, some, well, not specific use case, but another use case of it. You don't have to load the element from Microfrontend always. So you can either have it preloaded, or you can use native HTML elements. Like here we are using a default image. We just specify the source of the image and some alt text. Yep, back to you.
Okay, so let's speak about the features and use cases which we support. So first thing is that now you can use the Kubernetes manifest and you can use the GitOps. So basically when you want to deliver the microfrontends and compose the sites and you would like to add additional features, all what your team need to know is how to create a Kubernetes manifest, and you give him some GitOps options. So for example, in his lectures, we use FluxCD and let the students actually define manifest in the GitOps way using the FluxCD infrastructure. Once you deploy the Polyfy, you will get automatic possibility of automatic definitions of ingress routes or gateway API routes. And you could have, of course, in the one cluster, multiple sites. By defining this microfrontend class, you could basically run multiple sites into one cluster. So it's not restricted to one microfrontend class or microfrontend site in the cluster. The next thing, when you build a system, you basically, what you need to know from the architectural or the conceptual point of view is just the concept of the context and concept of the routes. So each time you would like to define the micro features, you basically need just to define the context. Initially, you will start with a blank screen. In this blank screen, there is the initial context, which is the shell. And in this shell, you basically define your microfrontend, so even the shell is the microfrontend. Like you could have multiple application shells for each part, for each route. And depending on the route, on the display rules, you can decide which kind of the application shell you will show on the page. In this case, we display the material design shell, which is part of the project. Then this material design shell has own context. Yeah? So it defines multiple contexts into which, again, it's by loosely coupling. Anybody can define the web component or additional feature and say, okay, it should show in this specific context. In your micro applications or the micro features, if you want to use some common component, just again, loosely coupled component who is taken care by the extra team, you again just define the context, and this way you can nest the features and communicate with between the components by using the event APIs. So because you have all these possible contexts, you sometimes need to depend on the external web components. For example, you would like to use some bundle, you would like to use some brand elements. You basically can just define the dependencies to additional microfrontends. Each time your microfrontend should be shown, it's loaded automatically, but it's loaded only on the demand, so only at the sites where your web components really should be shown. And to avoid some cyclic dependencies, there is also built-in cycle dependency checks, in which case you will get the error. Regarding cross-cutting concerns, there is some built-in functionality which solves the common problems of delivering the site. So for example, from the security point of view, there was already mentioned the content security policy headers, which you can configure for your, for your microsites. There's also some security kind of handling the roles. So you can specify display rules for the microfrontends to show the micro features just for the specific roles. So you can read the roles from the headers, and you can decide, okay, for this role of the users, the given micro features is not intended, so it will be not shown. So it's not the access control, it's more the feature flagging, but helps when deciding how the front end should look like for the specific roles or specific users. We have also built-in support for the progressive web applications. You can configure the caching strategy, so you can configure it centrally for the whole micro front-end site, or you can have the specific rules for each micro front-end. In this case, you can get also some offline work with your micro front-end sites. And what we plan, we don't have implemented yet, but we plan for the server-side rendering. So we would like to have centralized server-side rendering, which will also then offload the teams from creating own server-side rendering solutions. So Michal now shows short demo.
Yeah, so it's called short demo, but it's really static demo, I would say. It's I decided to make it so that if you want, you can just look at the presentation, follow the steps, and you should get the same results as I did. Also, the results that I show here are not fully functional, but I will explain it. So first of all, what you need to do is deploy the controller itself, right? So if you go to GitHub, the Polyphia, and the Polyphia controller repository, you just clone it and apply our default configuration. Then you check if your custom resource definitions are installed, if the pods are running. It should work out of the box even if you have like completely empty Kubernetes cluster. So this is also what I take into consideration here in this demo. So you should see something similar to what is displayed on these two pictures, right? So the resources and the pod is running. Then, of course, the controller is not enough. You need also some UI, right? Because the controller itself is not doing it much. So we have this sample application shell in the repository as well, called the Polyphia MD shell. So it's built on Material Designs web components. So again, you just clone it, apply the manifest. We have manifest without sample apps, but if you want to see something very quickly, you can also use the sample apps as something to play around with if you want. So you just apply it, and again, if you have plain empty cluster, you can just port forward the service of the controller, and you should be able to see this exact application. So this works. You can click around it, you can see different web components there, but yeah, maybe that's not what you want. Maybe you want to add something yours, right? So again, I'm just hinting some ideas where you can look for some examples. So these links that you see here, this is the outcomes of the university lectures, actually. So we have some workshops with the students, let's call it like that, where they create their own micro-frontends and they have to integrate with it. So we have some demos for that. I will use it further, but if you want to have a look, it's just a simple web component implemented with Stencil.js. So how do I make it sure that Polyphia is my front end, right? So first of all, you need the default deployment and some service, very basic. So from this deployment, we will just serve the bundle for the Polyphia to load it. That's it? No, of course not. You have to create some reference to the service because we wouldn't know where to look for the service and for the module. So you specify your web component, and yeah, you can assign it to this Fea front-end class. The reason why I'm not defining it in the demo because the sample application shell is already defining this class, so I don't have to do it again. Then you specify the module path, where to look for the module. So in my case, it's in build folder called ambulance UFE. It's UFE because it's microfrontend, so micro is not really a standard ASCII character, so we had to use U. Then this proxy flag is actually default, so we don't have to specify it, but it's by default true. If you would like to load it from, for example, I don't know, some CDN or whatever, you should be able to just specify this proxy to false and it should work. And then I have the link to the service. And now I want to put the tile in the front end, right? So as you could see that Jupyter or Saturn, sorry. So you want to see your application there as well, right? So you can specify, you can again use the component built in our shell. That's the element polyfia MD app. And you can configure it to display in different contexts. So it can be used for that applications. In this case, we only use it for that one, but you can specify this Railer also or the driver content. Then what happens when I click on it? So again, as I showed previously, you just specify another web component. This time, it's the web component coming out of my bundle. So I first define the display rule. So if it's in, I want it in the main content. When I'm on this subpath, this Ševčík ambulance wheel, again, it has my initials because we have a lot of students and we were all under the same namespace, so we had to make it unique by including some initials or something, right? So I'm on that subpath and I want to display it into the main content. And I'm choosing this element, what's demo ambulance wheel app, which is a waiting list app for the patients. And the last thing, specify from which microfrontend to load it. So what the controller will do then, it will query the module and the element would be registered. Again, it's not all. You have to deploy it, of course. So you just put it to some sample file and just apply it on your front end, on your Kubernetes. And you should be able to see that the microfrontends were applied and that the web components are also there. The rest is then handled by the polyfia. And then you should be able to see something like this, although it's not very visible. So the first thing is here, the tile on the right will appear, which is the waiting list for the patients. Then if you open it, it will not work because the version that I deployed is a version where it is also integrated with Web API. And the Web API I didn't deploy currently, so it just throws some internal server error or whatever, right? So, but if you just, for the example, you can see that the front end is there and also it's working at least somehow, so some interaction is there. But you can try it out and you should be able to even incorporate your modules if it can be, if your framework can compile a web component, it should be able to work with polyfia. Thank you. And now I'm opening time for questions.
Maybe also for interest, even his presentation is actually part of solution, so it's kind of the microfrontend which we build into this framework. So, thank you.
There are some questions. Where?
It looks great. Are you planning any other features? Will you welcome other contributors? If somebody wants to contribute, it's welcomed. And from the other features, I mentioned the server-side rendering. This is what we would like to add. Then we had idea of, so there is this material design shell, which just follows the material design rules. We would like to have also something like the portlet solutions where the user can place the own widgets on the specific areas. So this is the additional idea which we have. and possibly there will come additional features. Yeah. How does microfrontend workflow compare to flexible managed tool like Cloudflare Pages that doesn't require building custom Docker files? So at least at the time when we were creating, and even now I was looking at the possible solution of the microfrontends, how you would integrate front end of various teams. One of the problems was that you either need to compile it in the runtime or you need to have the specific solutions. But for us, the primary goal was, okay, you use the Kubernetes and GitOps on the back end, you need to be able to do it also on the front end. Like there are various solutions for the microfrontends, but the common problem for us was, okay, it's additional technology, additional load for the team, additional load for the students. We want to explain to them that you need to work cloud native, you need to follow some rules, and this was actually just piece where we were missing, like to actually use the cloud native Kubernetes for the whole feature. But there are definitely multiple solutions. The biggest difference is, as I said, how you deliver and how you compile the microfrontends to integrated solutions. How does it compare to single SPI with its flexibility? Can be integrated with it to get the best of the both. Actually, it's the single server page application. And I would say that also the microfrontend should be single server page applications conceptually. And this, being the single page application is great, but if you want to integrate multiple features, then you will be challenged by how to actually get the common look and feel and how to deliver it in the one integrated solutions. As one of the examples, we had, for example, the project where we were using the timeline, but there was multiple features. And each feature actually developed its own timeline, which was slightly different from the other teams. So instead of that, you would like to have integrated solution where you just take the common component as the micro features and just let the additional or extra team, okay, you are responsible for creating the front-end feature for the timeline. Yeah, so this would be one solution. If you are a small team and you have everything in your hands and on the small projects, then you can also do it in the single page application, in the single application, that's also possible. It's also one thing you should not maybe overuse this possibility. Not everything needs to be separated micro features, so some balance is always needed. Do you use in production and Siemens? Any use outside of education? Actually, yes. We use it on some project, or I use it on the project, where actually I don't use MD shell, like material design shell, but I have the specific Siemens Healthineers branding shell, which actually has the feel and look, which is prescribed for the Siemens products. What do students say on the Kubernetes? Is there a space at Slovak and Czech universities to get to Kubernetes? Kudos for this. Thanks for kudos. Yeah, they are actually excited. So for a lot of the people, Kubernetes, or for a lot of the students, Kubernetes is quite new. Yeah, so we have it's optional, these are optional lectures, and we have 50 slots so for the 50 students, which can be accepted at the lectures. And in the last 5 years, we have always full 50 students actually. So they are interested. They are interested in the cloud native, in the Kubernetes and Docker. For some of them already works, but usually just few guys on the Kubernetes and Docker. And from the feedbacks which we are getting, they are really appreciating that Kubernetes is something they will need in the practice, and they like to learn it. Thank you.
Thank you.